digitaljamsessions.com. Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. This week we're joined by Adiza from Level 39, Steve from Amplified Robot, Lee is back from Microsoft, we have with us also Hayley from Mass Challenge once again, and we are also joined by Nicole and Laurie, who's going to explain all about who he is and what he does. If you would like to start, Laurie.
Thanks very much. My name's Laurie. I'm the founder of Donative. We are trying to change the way in which charities communicate the impact of their work to their donors and to inspire people to give more and get more active in their relationship with charities. Prior to that, I was at a startup for a number of years called Rightster, that grew from a very small company up to a pretty large one. So I spent a lot of time recruiting developers there. And also I'm a keen advocate of hack days, having a few myself, and created some wonderful and not so wonderful stuff, while also mentoring with an organization called Young Rewired State that help kids get into programming and run a hack week every summer, which is great fun.
Okay. And Lee, why don't you explain to us a little bit more about what you do specifically with Microsoft?
Hi everyone, so I'm Lee Stout. I'm a technical evangelist at Microsoft UK. So my role is working with students, educators and developers around building for the Microsoft platform. So that's building for both Windows, Cloud and Xbox. Again, have had quite a lot of involvement with young developers, so from students, from schools, colleges and universities. Been heavily involved in the new BBC Microbit project and also been working with Young Rewired State, and we host a Young Rewired State actually in the Microsoft offices where we get 60 to 80 children each year as part of Young Rewired State Week doing hacks.
Wonderful. And also you have the Imagine Cup as well, let's not forget.
And we have the Imagine Cup, yeah. So driving home opportunities for students, building, developing solutions which hopefully contribute to a worldwide good.
Okay, and Adiza, why don't you tell us more about what you do at Level 39?
So Level 39 is a technology accelerator and incubator based in Canary Wharf, and we have 200 plus startup companies that are based here. And my role is to connect our companies into mentors, investors and partners. And as part of looking after our companies, we actually have a talent element to what we do. So we have a jobs board here at Level 39. We've got a number of programs with Code First Girls, Code Club and other universities to encourage talent into our industry so that they can actually join our companies. So I also do look after hiring for Team 39 as well. So elements of hiring into our own team. And we've actually just almost finished a round of hiring ourselves. So talent, hiring, all that sort of stuff is totally an area that I cover purely by accident.
Wonderful. Thank you. And why don't you tell us more about what you do at Mass Challenge, Hayley?
Sure. I'm the global PR manager at Mass Challenge. We started in Boston in 2009. We launched here in London 1 year ago, and now we're expanding to 3 locations globally. So I'm helping to lead the expansion, to tell people about it, but also to look for new talent all over the world and to help our companies look for talent as well. It's a constant struggle, I think, for young companies to find good talent, whether you're in Boston, Silicon Valley, London, anywhere in the world. These skills that young companies need are all in huge demand. We work with them to find the best places to recruit and to meet new potential talent. So I'm quite involved with a lot of them, including Laurie from Donative, who is one of our startup companies.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Steve, why don't you tell us all about what you do at Amplified Robot?
Well, Amplified Robot is a virtual reality and augmenting reality company. We've been in the space just about 9 years now. And yes, we're always on the lookout for new talent. As you know, Tanya, I also look after the Augmenting Reality Meetup Group, which is a meetup group for anybody who's interested in anything to do with virtual reality and augmented reality. And we've got about 2,500 members now, so it's looking good on that side. And a lot of people sort of come to that who are interested in finding out how they can get into the industry.
Thank you very much, Steve. And why don't you explain to us, Nicole, exactly who you are and what you do?
Hi, my name's Nicole. I'm the founder of Adpreneurs. And what we focus on is world-changing ideas. So making them happen, essentially, which is actually our slogan. And sometimes that kind of manifests into hackathons. It can also be different types of events. And it could also be inventing products and services.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. So today, the reason why we're all focused so much about recruitment and our experiences with recruitment and hackathons is because the question for today is really around this emerging trend that we've seen happen over the last couple of years of the use of hackathons as a recruitment tool. And this goes back to a little bit of what Hayley was saying just now about the difficulty in finding the right skill sets and the right talent and the right attitudes in people to recruit these days in this new digital nomad era that we live in. And so I'm interested to understand, first of all, in terms of the experiences of the use of hackathons as a recruitment methodology. And I'm going to go to you first, Lee, because I know that you go to an awful lot of these hackathons and you are very involved in the development community approach to hackathons. Have you seen this become more of a method for recruitment?
So it's an interesting one. I don't necessarily think it's a direct method of recruitment. So I don't see recruiters there actually recruiting people based on hackathons. I think it's more of an opportunity for students and hackers to develop a real portfolio of items or real contributions to the community, whether it be in GitHub or Coplex, etc. So I think recruiters are starting to attend these and support hacks, in terms of sponsorship. Purely because they see it's a great way of people having and proving that they have experience in X technology or X subject. So to your answer, it probably is a yes, but I'm not sure if it's direct, if that makes sense.
No, it makes absolute sense. So, Nicole, I know that you obviously run and organise a lot of these events. What's your perception in terms of how people are perceiving the use of a hackathon and whether or not it's a viable methodology for recruitment?
So I think when it comes to looking at hackathons as an essence of recruitment, it is a very good way of seeing people actually do and work, right? And see what they are actually capable of versus like an interview where people can say a lot of things, but then when put into practice may change, right? It's a great way of seeing like what people are best at. And it's also a really interesting way of seeing how they might work with other people, especially in a team dynamic. You can find out quite quickly if they're a team player, if they're introverted, extroverted, and all these other qualities that you might look for. So in that sense, I think it's a fantastic way to recruit as long as you're honest about your recruitment objective from the beginning.
Okay. And what's your take on this, Hayley? Because obviously you were saying about how difficult it is, irrespective of a territory and location, how it's becoming more of a challenge in terms of recruitment. Do you see these types of events as an opportunity for recruitment?
Definitely. I think it's a great way to get people with relevant skills in the same room and then to test them out in real life, as the others were saying. I think that it's probably more relevant to have these types of activities rather than the traditional interview and go through 3 rounds of filling out paperwork. And in startups, you really have to get in and start doing immediately. Your first day is not just here's the water machine and here's the bathroom. You really have to start pitching in immediately. And so startups especially can't afford the luxury of having someone learn on the job. They need to know that that person can deliver immediately and say what they're going to do. So I think hackathons are a great way for startups, especially to recruit.
I'm interested to hear from you, Adiza, in terms of you sit in that really interesting divide between corporate world in terms of finance and fintech and the kind of new startup, incubator, accelerator type space as well. So you're seeing a bit of a crossover traits of how people are behaving. Do you think that there is more value to these less traditional ways of identifying people's skill sets and really easing that information out of them versus the traditional interview process?
I think that especially within the startup space, startups really want to look at people's ways of working under high pressure, because being in a startup environment is quite a pressurizing experience. So when you have the pressure of forming a team in 48 hours and how will that team get together to solve problems, that's a pretty unique way of actually understanding how people think. I think that for us, we've seen a rise of different technology companies and banks actually doing hackathons as a way to find talent. We've also seen organizations like UCL partner with some of the HR teams of some of the different banks around here in order to spot technical talent that understands technical side, but also has an interest in the space. I think that the UK is currently doing more and more work to make sure that the bridge between universities and industry is being divided. And that's why things like hackathons are useful, but it's not the only way. And we also help our companies think about the fact that they need to constantly be recruiting or thinking about how they're recruiting. So it's not just oh, right, I need to hire this person. Now I need to go out and find talent. It's actually, well, how do I make sure that I can fulfill my talent goals in the long term? And so we do host a number of meetups here for our companies, and the majority of those meetups are technical as well. And our companies do use them to recruit. So it's not only about hackathons as a technical place, it's also about other ways that technical learning is happening in London. And that is a good way to spot talent. But it's actually fiercely competitive. So now it's also about what the goals of your company are and whether people buy into that goal and vision, because technical talent and tech talent is actually at a premium. So lots of people are after it.
It's interesting that you say this, because I do think that there is this nature of non-traditional recruitment that's happening now. And actually, Steve, as the founder of one of the largest meetup groups in the UK for the VR industry, I think you probably have a very good insight and a perspective on how people are leveraging things like meetups in terms of just trying to identify that talent and be able to also put themselves out there as a business. And as Adiza was saying, really be able to profile what your vision is as a company to draw those potential, candidates in. How are you seeing your meetups being used?
Tanya, that's absolutely correct. I mean, I think that we're seeing more and more people that we get out of meetups actually doing a big shout out for people to come and actually talk to them about perhaps joining their companies. And I think, as everyone's pointing out, it's becoming more and more difficult to find good talent in the space that's required. And I just want to sort of nip back a little bit onto the hackathon thing, because I think that probably the film Social Network really sort of pointed out a really sort of full-on way in which people can use hackathons. Perhaps that might be not an exact example, but certainly it's a way of actually finding out the talent very quickly that you can employ for your company.
So I'm interested, Laurie, from your perspective. Obviously, you're very much at the cold front when it comes to startup and people management and the interaction within people. How do you see this emerging, and what do you see as the emerging trends when it comes to the way that people are approaching recruitment or candidacy, if you like, and identifying, shortlisting that talent?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think the dynamics that you see at play at a hack day are very much suited to your ideal startup employee. It's someone who's come along and maybe got, between sometimes 4 hours up to 48 hours to take some raw materials and turn them into an actual functioning product, and it's sink or swim time. So a startup is absolutely crucial. That might not be the same profile of an engineer that you need in a large organization, but it really depends what you're after. But I think the fact that there are these non-traditional methods just points to the creative ways in which you can go and recruit people these days, and especially with developers. The profile is usually someone who's quite interested in working on exciting projects, large projects, ones that excite them and get them interested in the job beyond the salary. It's related back to the kind of mission of the company and the scale of that platform. Yeah. And you can use creative things like, often you'll find the source code of a website. There might be a little hidden recruitment message, and that's a great way to go and draw out people who are actually interested in your product, but in a very sort of, you would never think of that as part and parcel of the traditional recruitment process. I think what hack days have for their advantage that companies can leverage is just getting people excited about your business, and you can slip that in via exposing public data or data sets that you have to play with, big data sets, or it could be APIs. The quality of your APIs says a lot about the sort of level of tech expertise at your company. And obviously it's a chance to get your staff interacting with people as well. And that doesn't need to be a hard sell. It can just literally be meeting people and understanding culture of that company. Because as a developer, obviously, we have a lot of choice being highly in demand. But I think a lot of people is that kind of working environment and the ethics and the mission behind the company. And there's no better way to get that across than having someone in person on the ground talking to people about their own business.
Interesting. And I'm curious because I think, Nicole, of all the people in this particular conversation, you probably are the closest to this kind of digital nomad generation. I say this on the basis that Nicole is organising and running something called the Digital Nomad Cruise. So you really know what it is to be a digital nomad. And in that respect, I think that there is a different mindset that is emerging with this next generation of young people who are going into the workplace, and they really are going into the workplace on their own terms. It's no longer so much about impress me, I'm your potential employer, tell me what you can do for me. It's so much as I'm your potential employer, let me show you all the amazing things that I'm going to give to you. But I think there's definitely been that shift change in the way that people are communicating. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, because obviously as a digital nomad, I'm saying this with inverted comma fingers, there's a very different attitude that's very prevalent now.
Yeah, I think the attitude is also like people are realizing they don't need a desk and they don't need to be in an office in order to do good work, right? So like there's this growing ideology of people who just work behind their laptops but don't necessarily have to be bound to any physical space or time, which also moves people towards this kind of new movement of trusting the employee more, which is different from like a corporate setting, right? Where, you know, like you have goals and check-ins and things like that. Whereas now needs more trust. So I hire you because I trust what you do, and you come in and you blow me away. And then I trust you to execute on that job irrespective of where you are. And this is happening more and more so because younger generations are makers and doers, which is really, really cool. They're making things as early as 10, some even 9. There was a 9-year-old founder of a company I saw the other day, which is just nuts, which means like they just aren't going to grow up into the mentality of please hire me anymore. It's no longer the case. It's more like, look, this is what I have to offer. I can push your company in this direction or that direction. If you want to explore this opportunity, let's work together in a partnership more than for someone, if that makes sense. So we're kind of moving towards a generation of collaboration as opposed to the previous model of employer and employee.
Okay, and what's your take on that, Adiza?
I think that it really is, organizations really are starting to look at the culture of their organizations, because that's what they're competing against when they're looking for talent. So digital nomads have so many different options out there, and they are happy to take the risk to say, you know what, I'll do this for a few months and then I'll go and do something else for a few months. So you really need to work really hard to keep and retain talent and keep talent interested in what you're doing. And it's the same in the different elements of a technology-driven business. And so I really think that a lot of leadership teams are scratching their head on how do they make sure that their teams are motivated, but also engaged and feel challenged, because it's actually pretty, for some people and for those that have a different style of management, that's seen as pretty demanding. Some people are used to, oh, right, I hire you, you do the work for me, and that's it. Well, actually, the relationship isn't like that anymore. It really is about making sure that there is a stronger element of relationship, and that the culture and the reason that people are driven to work for your company ingrained in what they want to do and their lifestyles as well. And we're finding it ourselves. So the Code First Girls program here at Level 39, and that's a program which helps get graduate women into technology. And we've actually put members of our team onto that course as well to give them the skills to help them understand technology in a different way. But the onus was on us as Level 39 to suggest, you know what, this will work in enhancing your knowledge, but it will also add value to you. So employers really need to start making sure they add real value to their employees. So it's not just a one-way exchange. It's actually a two-way exchange and a conversation. You can't just have your classic development plans that people used to have and say, oh, I'll send you to one seminar, one conference. Actually, it needs to be more than that.
It's interesting that you mentioned this almost lifestyle approach to cultivating the individual employee and giving them that sense that they are part of a lifestyle. And I'd be really interested to hear from you, Lee, bearing in mind that you are in the belly of the beast, so to speak, at Microsoft. Do you feel that this is the way forward for businesses, is to approach it much more as a partnership and to approach it much more as a relationship between equals versus an authoritative figure and the underling, so to speak?
Give me the easy questions, don't you, Tanya?
You know you love it, Lee.
So I think it's going to be more of a mutual relationship now. I think the problem these days, and I think we've all faced this, is just the cost of facilitating these events and hacks. So to do a large scale hack or event, whether it's yourself or with a partner, costs a significant amount. So I think it comes down to what do people really want to achieve from this hack. So if it's a pure recruitment play, I would say, hacks are going to become more focused in the nature. So it could be more specific on X technology or X service or X API to see what people can do and deliver with those services to then be looked at as potential future talent. Or I think it's going to be more of a direct acquisition play in terms of who are those users who are interested in doing X and Y. So I think hacks are really interesting ways of doing things. I personally like doing the hacks for good, and we've just done one last weekend with UCL, and we partnered with the NHS Code for Health group. where we set a big data science problem around code for health. And I think we had just under 200 people building with the new Cortana Analytics suite, which is a data science tool with machine learning. But again, it was very focused around this product set because the product team wanted to make this product better. So the best way we could think of doing this was get the top PhDs and scientists in a room and actually say, look, guys, have a play with this and see what you can come up with. And then we're going to feed this back into the product. So I think hacks become more focused for what outcomes are required or to be delivered, if that makes sense.
But what's your sense in terms of that idea that I think where Adiza was coming at it from was this idea that you as the employer have more of a responsibility to allow your employees to feel that they are in a more of a direct relationship with you than necessarily in the past. And that idea that you care enough to suggest and recommend courses, for example, as Level 39 has done with their employees, to help to expand and grow them and identify those opportunities for them, rather than waiting for somebody to say, this is my development program and therefore I will tick off the boxes as I go.
Yeah, I think that PDPs or personal development plans are key to everyone's success. I think, I'm lucky because I work for a big corporate and they allow us that time to do what we think is important to ourselves in terms of career growth, and everybody's expected to have a PDP within Microsoft, which is openly discussed, and you can say, I want to be in this role in 3 years and this is how I'm going to get there. Is that right? And your manager will effectively support you in that opportunity as well. So I think that is essential to everyone in terms of how it goes. We're doing some quite interesting stuff within Microsoft. So we ran a program called 1 Week, where we actually had open opportunities for teams to do cross-collaboration. And again, around a hack environment, so it was quite cool. It fits with what we're talking about today, where we could say we're not happy with X way something works or how something's done, or there's an opportunity in the market. And we could go and speak to anybody within the company, whether it be from Skype to the Office team, to Windows team, to Xbox, and spend 1 week together in a team that you would never work with before to develop a solution that could potentially become a product. So there's lots of cool opportunities like that we definitely have within Microsoft.
I'd like to jump in as well, Tanya. It's Haley. So at Mass Challenge, we actually work with a lot of corporate partners. We're a not-for-profit and we're supported mainly by corporate partners like IBM and Visa. So we have innovation dinners every once in a while where we invite our partners together and have open talks about what challenges they're facing. And the absolute number one challenge that they're facing is recruiting and keeping talent. And this issue of allowing employees the freedom and creativity to innovate within the company is really something that every corporate is striving for, but not all of them are achieving it to the same degree. And it sounds like Microsoft is doing a great job, but that is so important for keeping the really solid talent, because as Adiza was saying, to keep developers now, they have to be committed to the idea of the company, or really have to be committed and passionate about what they're working on beyond just the bottom line or beyond the traditional, we have this goal to make by the end of Q1. And allowing them ownership and the space to be innovative is so important.
But I'm curious, Haley, from your perspective, obviously, as Mass Challenge, you're working with new startups, you're working with entrepreneurs, and they, in and of themselves, have a different perspective on the workplace and the work environment. Traditionally, it was very much a case of you would look for the right job that you thought was right for you, you would go and apply, you would get into that business, and then you might stick with them for maybe 5 or 10 years, but that was pretty much you for quite a long period of time. Whereas in the world and the ecosystem of new startup, we're seeing people, on average, stick around a job for maybe about 18 months. 2.5, 3 years is definitely the long end of the spectrum when it comes to how long somebody's going to stick with these new startups if it hasn't really taken off by then. And so I'm curious from your perspective if you think that perhaps people are viewing entrepreneurialism and new startup as both an educationary tool as well as a way of developing their own talent as they go.
Definitely. I think the way the job market is now is that you look for the person. So as Nicole was saying, you look for that individual person to blow you away, and they really create their own roles now. So they'll have a passion or an idea that they feel adds to the company. They'll work on it, take it forward, be really passionate about it, and then move on sometimes. That's quite often what happens, whether that's in a large corporate or bouncing in between different startups, going on to found their own. So I think it's definitely shifting from we have this role and we need these skills to fill it. It's
we need this type of person who has this type of vision and can make something amazing happen. So it's a totally different way of looking at talent and hiring now.
And that brings me to a broader question for anybody who wants to jump in on this one. But from the perspective of how things might have looked a little while ago on a CV, you know, when you see somebody having moved within a certain period of time and having multiple changes to their CV, that was viewed as a bit of a negative thing. Somebody who can't commit to a company, doesn't want to stick around for very long. Nowadays, we're seeing this whole, as Nicole was saying, this whole kind of freelance approach almost of, I'll stick with you for as long as the project is interesting, and then I'll move on to the next project. So do you think that there is now a complete shift in the attitude towards how long somebody's going to stick with a company or not?
Can I jump in on this one?
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with Haley. I think in the future, if not now, people will invent their own jobs. Essentially, they will work on a project by project basis, and the entire, well, this is what my personal opinion is, and I've read a little bit about it, kind of follows that everyone will be a freelancer in the future. Everyone. We'll be sharing not only like services like Uber where we share cars, we'll be sharing skills, and we'll move from project to project. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it, actually. I think it's a natural evolution of work for the digital period that we're in. And especially because now things cost more money, people would rather have online businesses and the freedom to move around. So I think, the attitude towards, someone moving around often is changing and needs to change also from those like in a more corporate background. And I think we need to be more open to trusting people to execute and move project by project.
It's interesting you should say this. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's up to the organisations to also make sure that they find exciting projects for their teams to work on so that their teams see that growth. Because the environment that we work in is pretty fast-paced and fast-changing. So it means that actually there'll always be different types of projects that you can work on. And it's up to the employee to actually say, you know what? I'm going to take this risk and I'm going to try and own this project, but I'm going to get assistance in helping grow that project and make my mark on it. And so organizations are being forced to find more and more innovative projects for their teams to do, but that projects that add value to the overall business goals. And I also think that it's shifting to issues of authenticity. So organizations have to now show that they have authentic goals that are driving their businesses so that they are able to motivate and retain talent. Because in this kind of market, people can move around quite a lot. So you have to make sure that you keep the talent that's in your business.
Can I just add to that? Because I completely agree. And I think that's a big trend that you've seen is mission-based companies really putting the mission, the why, at the forefront, which leads the company culture. And I think that is a massively important to engage not just developers, but also employees generally within a company, makes them more loyal, makes them feel more engaged and part of that business with a real sort of goal that everyone's aligned towards. But also, like you say, it is the balance of power is really in the hands of the technical people at the moment due to the lack of sufficient quality developers that are, because it can make a big difference being someone who's a really top quality developer versus someone who's kind of a mid-range developer. So this is why you need to work really hard to attract the very best talent, because it makes such a dramatic difference to the output of your company. But as times change and as the environment evolves, you might see that if there are more developers around, that there might be less switching between jobs as there's kind of less competition for the best talent. And I think a lot of this comes back to the way in which we have the ability to recruit people internationally, but also making sure that the environment is really set up to be inclusive. I think you find a lot of companies, and I've witnessed this myself, where the ratio of men to women is incredibly skewed towards men. I know there's an awful lot of initiatives focusing on all parts of the problem, from the pipeline through to the culture, but it's such a huge issue. I think if this were addressed, we'd find that actually the balance of power would be less with developers, and actually it would be kind of not so necessary to try and keep developers and sort of bow down to them and try and keep them engaged in the company so much. But it's something that is changing. But I think it will be a problem for the next at least 5-10 years. I've seen estimates about the way in which I think there's an estimate saying that the Ministry of Defence are worried about the impact on security by not having enough technical cybersecurity experts for the next 10 years in the UK. So it is a major problem.
And actually, that's the shortage occupation skills that for visas in the UK actually changed to include cyber security expert, I think, last year. And that is showing that we do have certain occupations that are short in the UK, and we need to make sure that we can look for talent globally and that we stay as a global leader so that our businesses can grow. So that means it's easier to hire people from all over the world because currently some companies find it so hard and they have to outsource, and then the knock-on effect of outsourcing and not having everyone in-house, unless you are a really good CTO, it's actually really hard to manage outsourced development as well.
So I'm curious because I feel like we're skewing the conversation slightly, and I feel a bit sorry for anybody who's listening to this who is not involved in development. I think you're going to be thinking the world is doom and gloom and that there's no hope for the future. But I'm curious to understand, because kind of building on from what Laurie was saying, and I do think, yes, there is a significant long-term problem, but also at the same time, there is this issue of just generalistically with entrepreneurship and with new startups. There is almost an attitude, if you like, of people who are entrepreneurial, who join these new startups early, and so they're one of the first 50 in the door of a new startup, tend to want to remain in a business that is still young and has that energetic vibe about it. And so when a company grows to beyond 300 people and it becomes a big, proper grown-up company, you see that shift of all of those early adopters, all of those people who came in the door in the first 50, move on to go and start up something new or to go and join another new startup, because they don't necessarily want to be in that maturing environment as the business grows and becomes more mature and becomes more corporate in its approach. And I'm curious from your perspective, Hayley, if you see that kind of thing happen very much with these businesses as they do kind of start to expand and grow.
Yeah, definitely. I think with a lot of my friends, anecdotally, and the startups that I've worked with, once they get big enough, then it doesn't have the same energy. And so they keep searching for that next cool thing that they can be passionate about and innovative with. So I think that's definitely happening, and it might continue as well.
Okay, just to jump in on that, actually, because so I was the first employee at a startup. And we grew from a small team up to around 250 people at peak. And I definitely witnessed what you mentioned there, which is the shift in culture from the hacker environment of must get it done. You've got, days to deliver something that's quite intense to build, but it's just got to be done. And there's no two ways around it. You can't go and rope other people in, get another team involved. And then at the other extreme, to be in a situation where you are, say, an enterprise quality platform with a, say, 100 strong development team, the switch from hacking to process driven development approaches is just, they are polar opposites. And I've seen people who are suitable change from one environment to another, and also a lot of people who have struggled making that shift. I don't think it's impossible to be the person who's there at the start of a startup and also be there once the organization grows. But what it does require is a massive focus on learning and accepting that things change. And you can't be that person who's the pivotal person at the start, constantly trying to be the person to do things. You need to switch from a perspective of being the doer into the kind of enabler and the collaborator. So I think it really depends on the person, but it does take a lot of guidance to make sure that the culture is kind of accepting of that change and that people aren't led to believe that they are the superstar and that they'll continue to be a superstar in a 250-person organization.
That's so true. But also, the other thing I would add on to that as well is it necessarily a bad thing if you do have a core group of people who were great as your core founding group and your superstars when you needed them? Is it necessarily a bad thing to know that at a certain step when you're changing up into becoming that big corporation with process, that you say to them, actually, guys, now is the time to jump off board if you want to. This is the right time for you to move on. Is that necessarily a bad thing?
I don't think it is. I think there are some people who just are much more suited to hacking together ideas, and it's great for them because they often like doing little projects and then moving on to the next thing and having lots of different ideas. And then there are people who like working on something really large scale that has a really good process behind it and is stable and scales. So I think it's just making sure that the awareness is there and that people are shown when things aren't working out, and you can encourage them to actually make the switch if it does need to be made. But I think it's just about the awareness, really.
So, Lee, I was meaning to ask this one earlier because I think you probably understand this one best because you've actually got a bit of experience in the games industry. But all of this conversation reminds me very much of a long time ago when somebody handed me a PDF document that was the staff handbook for a company called Valve. Now, I don't know, but I get the feeling you've read this one, right?
Yeah.
But I'm beginning to get the sense that that we're moving towards a culture that is actually very reflective of that. In as much as the kind of, so for anybody who wants to read it, we'll post a link to it in the notes. But essentially, the handbook at Valve is pretty much the kind of nutshell of it is your desk is on wheels and everybody else's desk is on wheels, and you just basically take your desk to whichever project you think is most worth your time and energy for as long as you think it's worth your time and energy. So essentially, the games that come through the pipeline are the ones that were most popular. It's quasi-political game in many senses. And I almost see the recruitment process, as Nicole was discussing it, becoming a little bit more like that, which is if you can't hold their attention long enough, they will just up and wheel away and go to the next company, because that is the nature of the talent now, who don't necessarily need to stick with you for the long haul.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think now it's about how to retain people, and I think that's retaining people at all levels. And I think one of the key aspects of that is allowing people to have that growth opportunity, so do things that they're interested in doing. But again, how does that align back to business metrics? And I think Valve were always very good at doing that because, one of their key driving metrics was revenue. So if you did a project, it didn't make any money, nobody really cared. I think that's where it becomes interesting. I think from a recruiter's perspective, I think it becomes more interesting. I was one of the universities a few weeks ago, actually, and I was just stopped at looking at the recruitment board. I wasn't looking for a job or anything, by the way, but I was just looking at the recruitment board just to see how recruiters go about it. And you've got the banks on there, Goldman Sachs and Deloitte still, who are offering ridiculous year placement salaries. I'm talking £40,000, £50,000 1 year placement posts. And then you've got the blue chips who are offering the 18 to 20,000 mark. And, you're thinking, if I was a top CS graduate or maths graduate and I was expected to get a first, would I just take the 40 grand job just to pay off my fees? And I think that's where we've got this big issue at the present with students about, I call it the CBA attitude. Can't be asked, to put it politely. And I think in the UK, we really do suffer with that at the moment. Students are complaining that they're paying for fees, they're paying for this, which is fair enough. I've got no problems about that. But I think it's about what are you doing to stand above the crowd? So are you doing hacks? Are you getting to meetup groups? Are you putting yourself in front of people? Are you talking about and sharing the experiences that you want to do and develop or build in the future? And I think we really struggle in terms of that. So we have Imagine Cup, which you mentioned earlier on, which is trying to help students by saying if you do this competition, there's 50 grand in it, and you get to come out to Redmond and you get to meet product teams, etc. So you can say it's sort of bribery to get people to do things, but I think we're in this situation where if we don't go to them with these offers, students won't engage because they don't know. I'm not sure if it's that they don't know what to do or there is just so much happening out there. They're not really sure which one to do, if that makes sense. I think the concern is they're being attacked continually from every single angle, and what is the best time and resource thing to do? Is it to concentrate on the course? Is it to attend hackathons or run social groups or be involved in societies? Or is it just to get the heads down and get a first?
So I have a generalistic question that I'm going to ask you first, Hayley, and that is just in terms of the future of recruitment and where we see this going. What do you think is going to be that most significant change in terms of technology or cultural shift or attitude even in the way that people are recruiting or are hiring or the way that they're looking at that recruitment market? What do you think that's going to be?
I think it'll actually be the issue of visas and immigration. This is a major issue that's coming up a lot here in the UK. It's coming up a lot in the United States. And with the EU referendum on the horizon, hopefully we won't be leaving the EU. But I think the way that people are going as far as being the nomadic travelers and very mobile workforce, the major thing that will affect it is whether or not people are able to get those visas to work in different places and to be able to get the talent into the different places that need it. So if we're not able to get the talent here in the UK that we need, then that will definitely put startups and companies at a huge disadvantage compared to other places that might have that access to talent in a more sort of liquid way, in a more
easily flowable way, which is really the nature of work for the future. So it's really up to the policymakers and governments to get over this angst that has gripped them as far as not wanting to have these open and sensible work sharing programs. So that's definitely my top.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'm curious from your perspective, Nicole, you were obviously thinking about this recruitment process that we were just talking about with Lee. What was your sentiment on that?
What I was going to say is I think actually organizations need to readapt the way that they hire. So for example, what my company does is that we hire based on the project and we pick people based on their skill sets and the things that they're passionate about. So for example, if we were to work with a governmental agency, we would pick people who are really passionate about making impact, let's say on society, and are interested in working with governmental organizations, and then handpick them based on their skill sets to work on this one project. And it seems to work well because people are inherently passionate about it from the beginning. You already have experience with their skill set, and you just call them back when you need that skill set and that passion and interest. And I think that's something that we're experimenting with personally, but also something that I think larger companies could adapt and think about, because hiring for the long term, I totally agree with what was said previously. Like, people generally lose enthusiasm within about 8 to 18 months and then drop off and leave. And students especially, who aren't even entirely sure what they want to do, want to dabble around before committing to anything. So if they could be hired based on one thing they're uber passionate about, I think students would over excel, to be honest, and then have the freedom to then move around to other things or try other things. But that's just, again, a personal point of view on the subject.
Okay, wonderful. So in terms of the future of recruitment and the attitudes that are going to need to change, I'm curious to hear from each of you what you think is going to be that most significant change for the recruitment and the attitude to recruitment. Whether that's a technological shift or a cultural shift, what do you think it is that's going to change the face of how people perceive recruitment or individuals in the future? And I'd love to start with you, Laurie.
Yeah, so I think the cultural shift in the short term will be focused around collaboration. There is this notion of, code tests being kind of the way in which a lot of technical interviews are performed, but there's a whole kind of softer side to people's skill sets, which are actually often not evaluated to the same degree, and that's especially important at the sort of startup stage. I think longer term, as GitHub revolutionized the way in which developers are able to share code, and there are, similarly UX tools that help designers share wireframes and also graphic designs for the sites they're working on. I think the future kind of holds more collaboration and looking at the way in which Slack again has kind of changed internal comms. We've got the potential to make the experience of working with a co-located team so much better. It actually would mean that you don't necessarily need people to be in the same space to the degree that they currently are. So I think, kind of remote working, and that'll be the big trend over the next 5 years.
Okay. And Steve, what about you? What's your take on the future for recruitment?
I think it is going to be a sort of cultural shift, Tanya. I see a very big sort of mirror to what happened in sort of film and television, but mainly film finishing, especially visual effects and special effects that are handled initially by a very strong core team, but then you sort of ramp up to lots of seats to get the job done, and a job that has to be done in a particular time frame. And then once the project's finished, then they shrink back down again to the core team. And I think that's going to happen with a lot of companies in virtual reality and augmented reality, because I think that the projects are going to be similar to the films. You have to get people, to actually also buy in to the journey that you're taking on whatever you're creating, whether it's a game or whether it's a specific project. I think you need to get people to understand exactly what you're trying to do with that and exactly what the goals are. I think at the moment, it's probably easier to get people to join in with you if you're working on a gaming project, because most of the people that I talked to just recently, that's their big thing. They come from a sort of gaming sort of background, from playing games for quite a number of years. And that's the type of area they want to get into. So I think at the moment it's not too difficult to get people to buy into the sort of gaming side. But I think for other projects, which are perhaps more long-term or more socially important, that might be slightly more difficult. So that's what I see happening in the sort of near future.
Okay. And what about you, Lee?
Yes, I have to agree with Laurie. I'm sort of living in this world semi now, if that makes sense. So I'm sat at home today, but I was in London last week and I'm all over the world. And my office is my laptop and my Skype connection as such. So I think we're used to doing that within Microsoft and what we have a big term around these things called V teams, which are basically a virtual team. So I could be working with somebody in the US, in Canada, in Africa, in Asia, and we all work together and work on the same project. But again, share that resource and those skills and experiences. I think, from a recruitment perspective, I think it's going to be more about demonstratable skills, being both that soft skills and technical skills. So I think things like GitHub are just going to be more and more predominant. So it's going to be more around, as an individual, what have you done? What have you contributed to? What do you know? And I think a lot of that is going to be tested as well. So we run lots of competitions internally where we use HackerRank to test candidates and to test people for competitions. But I think that's going to be more about the soft aspects, is about how can you communicate those technical aspects. So are you a contributor to Stack Overflow? Have you got contributions, other technical forums or forums around those specific areas of interest or aspects that we're looking for? So of experience around not only knowing this stuff and saying they're an expert in it, it's about now proving you're an expert and you're recognised as being an expert in that area.
I think that it's really about making sure that the recruitment role shifts out of the HR-esque type person and that it goes across organizations. So hiring through networks and advocacy is become more and more important. So you are able to tap into the talent when required. So I agree with the portfolio approach as well, that candidates are going to need to have to show their overview of the skills that they actually have. And you can keep saying, oh, right, I've done this. Well, actually, if I can't see that you've done it, then you don't really deserve to be at the table. But I think that it's really important for us as industry to help students and graduates and others that are looking to get into this industry to understand that they also need to put their best foot forward when it comes to their skill set, because that's something that is not necessarily always taught. So you might have a student who is a really top class developer, but they might not necessarily use certain tools, but they have developed certain projects. So how do you make sure that your portfolio is accessible? And even in other tech skill sets across a tech organization, when I was hiring into the ecosystem team, I definitely made sure that I Googled every single candidate and went to understand their portfolio and what they were up to. And that's something that's really key, that you show that you're putting your best foot forward and that you show that you have the right skill set to join a team and demonstrate it. Because there's a lot of people that say, yes, I have the skill, but showing that portfolio is really important, and activating your team as well to show that they should also take ownership. To hire into an awesome team is also great. But it's also hard because some people don't want to do that. Some people are slightly nervous about doing that. But if you have got an awesome team, then most people will be happy to say, oh, I'll share it across my LinkedIn and all this other stuff.
I'm interested, though, to understand, because one of the things you mentioned there is that idea that you Google somebody, when you're looking at potential candidates. And do we feel that there is a fine line between looking at somebody's Google and LinkedIn versus looking at their Facebook and their Twitter? Where does the divide lie for you in terms of what you'll look at?
So I keep to professional channels. So people, if you have a LinkedIn profile, if you have a public Twitter account, because those are tools that we use in our industry as a part of our role is advocacy. But I would always urge on the side of the fact that if you have your work out on a public platform, then people might look at it. So it's important to understand that. And that's something I don't think students necessarily understand sometimes, that people will look at your LinkedIn and your Twitter. I'm not saying that your Twitter will be associated directly to your interests on industry, but in the industry I work in, a lot of your professional social media profiles are really about your industry and your curiosity of what you're interested in as well, because that shows the certain drivers. I think Facebook is a whole different territory.
Okay. And what about you, Nicole? What's your thoughts on the future for recruitment?
I think the future of recruitment, essentially, like I mentioned earlier, is the invention of your own job. I believe, similar to Lee, that everyone will be nomadic and not necessarily be restricted to a time or a place. And I do think with the way the world is going, a lot of jobs won't exist anymore as well. And because of that, we'll be focusing our energies on more creative job roles also. And our definition of what a job role is. I think we've been kind of living off the industrialized age, focused on specialisms in one field. And I think the more we get into it, especially with the internet, the more we realize how multifaceted people are and how actually it's not just about having one specialty, but it's about utilizing different aspects of her brain in the best way to get the best output. So I think the future of work really is a freelance culture, on a global scale, corporate or startup. I don't think it'll matter much. Nomadic lifestyles, project by project way of working. And for graduates especially, a very problem solution way of looking at the world. So instead of looking for job roles that they want to work in, they'll look at problems they want to fix and then act to then help facilitate and fix that and then move on to the next project.
Interesting. Okay. Well, guys, I want to thank you all for joining us on this Digital Jam session. And as usual, we like to give our listeners a way to be able to find out more about you and what you're up to. So if you would share with us your social media handle of choice, I'm going to start with you, Lee.
Yep. So mine is Twitter and it's at Lee_Stott. So LEE_STOTT.
Thank you. And Adiza?
At level 39CW and at Adiza_Tajani.
Thank you. And Steve?
Right, mine's Twitter as well, and it's at ARReality. That's ARReality.
Wonderful, thank you. And Laurie, what about you?
So you can follow us on at Donative UK, and I'm on at Laurie Ainley.
Wonderful. And Hayley, can you give us your social media handle of choice?
Yes, it's at Mass Challenge UK.
Wonderful. And Nicole?
Adpreneurs, which is spelled ADPRENEURS. That's Twitter. And I'm going to be cheeky here and say email as well at Bosky, BOSKY, at adpreneurs.com.
You're just opening the can of worms. You're just doing it on purpose now.
Yeah, of course. Gotta push it.
Okay. Well, thank you once again for joining us on this Digital Jam session, and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review. And thanks again for joining us on this Digital Jam session. DigitalJamSessions.com